Hello there once again. It's tubalcain in my basement workshop, and my project today, and actually I'll work on it for a couple of days because I'll have paint to dry, but I'm going to work on this little vise that I bought at a garage sale, and it needs some repair work, and it needs a cleaning up and a paint job, and I'm going to do just that. So I paid only $5 for this, and it's really a nice vise, but it probably was in an unheated garage. Furthermore, I think it was dropped because the screw is bent. You can see that. So I'm going to make a new screw, clean it up, paint it, tune it up, and it'll be as good as new. Now, even though this is a Sears CRAFTSMAN, you can see that it actually is a Palmgren. It's absolutely identical to the Palmgren. You know, Sears didn't make anything themselves. So that was something they bought from Palmgren, and I got several of these Palmgren vices, and I don't know why I'm bothering to do this, because just how many drill press vices does a fellow need? Well, here's my third one that's just like it. It says Palmgren right here on a decal. So I suspect that's a newer one, and they just thought, well, let's not cast our name into it anymore, because then we can use the same patterns, and all we'll do is put different brand decals on them for including ourselves or Sears or whoever we can sell them to, and that's still American made. But the problem I had at the high school with these vices, the kids would invariably drop them off of the drill press table or wherever, and they would land on the screw, and they would bend the screw. The heavier the vise, like this one, well, it was a larger screw, but it would still bend it because there was so much weight behind it. So I had done a lot of repairs on those, and I kind of had to finally give up. But this one is an Acme screw, and these other ones here, these lighter duty ones, are just a Vise screw, V thread. You can get a lot more pressure on your work with an Acme. Also, this is brilliant that they made it out of hex stock, so you could also use a wrench on that. Notice that this is all beveled off because it's been dropped also, and mushroomed and then cleaned up with a file. I probably mentioned this in another video, but this little Palmgren is mounted on a piece of square tubing, and I keep it permanently on that because I got so many of these vices. And I like to hold it in the bench vise backwards. The screw is out of my way. That way I've got smooth jaws, not serrated jaws, to hold some of my delicate work. Also, it raises it up about 3 inches, which is a little bit better working height for me. So that's why that's mounted on square tubing. You might consider that yourself. But it needs to be a vise with these flanges. So I believe I'll start by disassembling it. Just loosen up the screw here a little bit, and then the screw should come right out of there. And there'll be a little groove in the end of the main screw here, as you can see. And can you see that wobble? With the handle removed and laying on the surface plate here, you can see the bend in the thing. Now, there's several different ways of making a screw, and I'm going to make it easy on myself. I could start with a 3/4 bar stock, because this in fact is 3/4 diameter right here, and that's a 1/2 13. That's a Unified National Coarse thread. But I'm going to go at it just a little bit different because I'm lazy today. I'm going to use all thread, and I'm going to make a sleeve or a bushing, whatever you might want to call it, that'll just go onto the end. And then, of course, the thread is done for me, and all I need to do is turn this end down and put the groove in there. Now we're going to see a little bit of that here on the end, and I will drill and tap that piece. Where did I lay it? It's here someplace. And then I will use Loctite to hold the threaded rod into it and then drill the hole. That threaded rod fits in there just nice. A little bit of slop, but so was there with the other thread. So this is probably a little bit oversized tapped hole, but that's not a problem. This is a nasty looking piece of all thread that I had laying around. And I do not like the looks of the plating on it anyway. It just looks so cheap. And I went down to the hardware store and I looked to see if I could buy threaded rod without plating, and I could not. So looking around the shop here, I do have a lot of other threaded rod, and here's another piece. This has a little bit of a gold plated finish on it. I think looks a little better, so I'm going to use that. All the same size. I probably got 50 pieces of threaded rod around here. With the draw removed now, I'm pondering this hole and the shape of it, and you can see it's a drilled hole. So the bottom of the hole is not flat. In fact, it's suspiciously like a drill bit. That is, the angle is the same. It's 59 degrees. So I'm going to put that angle on the end of here, because the idea is when you tighten this vise, or probably any vise that's made in America, that is, we want the end of the screw to be pushing. We do not want the set screw that's in the groove to be receiving any of that abuse, because we would not get as much pressure and we would damage the set screw and tear up the groove. So that has to go all the way in. So I'm going to try to observe the dimensions of this, and notice it doesn't come up against the thread here, up against the end. Also, it's quite sloppy here, and I think they did that so that they don't have to be so careful of their tolerances and have rejects. We made a lot of drill press vices in the high school, and I do know all of the little things that caused problems in the finished product, and they bound and they didn't operate very well if the workmanship was poor. The compound is set off to the left at 29.5 degrees to match the angle on the end of the screw. I've already faced off the end, and I'm just going to turn that taper on there now by basically the compound rest method of turning a taper is what it is. What I'm doing now is turning the diameter right here, and it happens to be an oddball diameter of 0.392, and the length of that is, I'm just taking it right off of this, and this isn't very critical either, and I set my stop, my carriage stop, so this is easy. I'm not down to diameter yet, and I'll do that off camera. But a couple points there. First of all, I'm still working with a 3-foot piece of ready rod. I didn't cut it off the length. So if I goof anything up here, although I haven't made a mistake since 1971, but should I make a mistake, I don't have to, I'll just chop this off and continue, and I haven't really spoiled more than an inch. Secondly, this is just horrible steel to turn, because it's a cold roll steel, whatever they bought cheap, I suppose. But the other thing is that these threads on all thread are not cut threads, they are rolled threads. Do you understand what I mean? They are rolled threads. They start with a diameter smaller than 1/2 inch and roll it just like they do on most fasteners, but that causes the metal to be displaced, and I want to call it cold forging even, and work hardened, so it's difficult to cut. Wow, that was tough metal. I got a terrible finish, and it took the point right off my tool, but it's going to do, and I'm at the right diameter. Got a little bit of unthreaded portion, just like the other one. Now, a point to make here is that I'm holding this threaded rod right in a 3-jaw chuck, but I'm not gripping it all that hard. You got to be careful you don't damage it. A collet would be better, but this is going to do. Next, I need to put the groove in there, and rather than measure it, I'm going to transfer it. I'm a big fan of transferring, but this is what that little set screw looks like, and we call that a dog point, and it fits in that little groove. So what I'm going to do is to put my new screw into the jaw and take a transfer punch, which I've already selected as exactly the right size, and I'm just going to give it a whack here. And that center punch mark is the center of the groove. Now I'm ready to make the groove. I've mounted a cutoff tool, and the groove is 5/32 wide, which is much wider than the grooving tools, the cutoff tool. So I'll make several passes, but I already determined the depth, and I located it according to that center punch mark that I made a minute ago. So now I'm ready to take the first cut. I'll show that, but I won't show the other as I widen the cut. To depth. Okay, there's the groove. There's the set screw. Got a good fit. And I believe that end is done. Well, there it is. Seems to fit up all right. Now the screws can't be put in too tight. It needs to come down into the groove, but not bottom out, because that would bind it. See how it's lifting the jaw? The jaw isn't fastened with its bottom plate either, but by backing it off just a little bit, there I got it, and a screw that is not bent. Now for my next trick, I cut this off, but I always let it be a little bit longer than what I need. So I got to cut off about 1 inch right there and make this piece, and I'll do that tomorrow. It's about supper time. Off camera, I took the 3/4 inch stock, and I only need a piece 1 inch long, but I am making it extra long now, and you'll see why in a few moments. But that has been drilled and tapped this size, but notice that part of the hole here is a clearance hole. Don't try to tap something that long, you'll break the tap. Even that 1 inch was a push. But this will go on up to that point where I got a little mark there, and it'll be about the same as this. And I'm going to Loctite it. And then come back here in a little while after the Loctite is set, and drill the cross hole and cut it to length and so on. So stick with me. It's been 2 hours since I used the permanent red Loctite and fastened that sleeve on there. And I'll be cutting it off where that mark is. And the hole, the cross hole, is going to be drilled right where X marks the spot. And that hole needs to be really one size over a 1/4 inch so we have clearance here. And that doesn't bind. And I'll have to make a new one of these. But anyway, the reason that I allowed extra length here is that so I can use my drill jig. You've seen me use this before. And I really need extra amount of material there for it to clamp properly. That's why it's extra long. Now what I do is I like to slide, and this is a 1/4 inch drill bushing. I do not have the next size larger, which is 17/64. So after drilling that, I will remove the bushing, just pull that out, and without a bushing and without removing the work, drill it the one size over, and it will still line up, and it'll open up that hole just a little bit. But in order to line that up, I like to look right down the bore to find the green mark. So it's just like looking down a Norden bomb sight at 25,000 feet. And when I get it right on the little green mark, I clamp that down, whoop, in 2 hands. Like wow. And I'll go over to the drill press, and I'll do that off camera and drill that out, like I said, and then remove the bushing. I know I'm repeating myself. It's kind of a tight fit. Like that. And then go in with the 17/64. I'll be right back. There it is, hot off the press. Got a little bit of a burr. Now I'm going to cut it off on the black line and face it off. And the idea here now is that that cross hole is perfectly drilled in the center. And I did a video on that at one time, telling how the different methods of drilling a cross hole without spoiling the work. And a jig is one of my favorites, or my favorite, a jig of some kind. But take a look at that video. I forgot what it's called. Something about cross holes. But that job is done. So off camera I'll saw that off, face it, and put a nice chamfer on there. Polish this a little bit, and the screw is done. The screw is totally done. The only evidence that this is all thread is on the end here. You can see a little bit of the thread, and boy, that is hard steel compared to the outer larger diameter here. Now I'm going to turn my attention to something a little bit easier here, and I'm going to start cleaning this up. The first thing I'll do is take the 2 jaw faces off by way of those 2 screws. And then I'm just going to clean up these jaws on the belt sander the way I already did to this bottom plate. Just dress it up a little bit. And then I'll start cleaning up the area here, the cast area. And I'll draw file, I believe, and polish this surface and the side surfaces here. If I had a surface grinder, I'd surface grind these jaws. I'm just about ready to paint, and I spent about the last hour cleaning, polishing, brushing, degreasing, etc. And I like to use really what are old belts. Actually, these were brand new 6x48 belts, and you know, if you had them on the shelf too long, sometimes you mount them and you run the sander for 10 seconds and they virtually explode as the glue joint fails. And throw them away if you want, but sometimes I keep them just for this purpose. So I got a nice long sheet. I should clamp one end. And it does a nice job of cleaning up surfaces like that. And I just polished this with emery cloth the best I could. And I don't worry about getting it all out, so don't waste your time, people, sometimes worrying about a real good finish, because Palmgren didn't worry about a good finish. You see? That wasn't ground. Those are milling marks. This might have been ground. That's pretty nice on the bottom side. Now what I'm going to do is, I think I told you I was going to paint this with some hammer tone paint, but you needed a second mortgage down at Ace Hardware to buy a can of that. So I'm going to take out last of this medium gray. It's kind of a machinery gray, and I'm just going to brush paint it because there isn't a whole lot to paint. Actually, now that I clean it up, the old paint probably would be satisfactory. Maybe I shouldn't even mess with it. You know what? I'm not going to paint it. Forget that. I hate painting anyway. That's cleaned up enough, so I'm going to reassemble it. Now I have cleaned up the jaws on the belt sander. So those are ready to reinstall. And yes, forget the painting. Assembly it is. Pretty well done here now, except for the handle. And here's the original handle that I had to saw off, and it appears that the end buttons are pressed on. They're not threaded on, and it's apparently a blind hole. So the way that I always made them when I was teaching was we took 1/4 inch rod about 3 inches long and threaded both ends 1/4 20, and we put nuts on there and then turned them down on the lathe or ground them in the beginning classes just offhand. But I would like to have a button on there a little bit longer than these nuts, the standard nuts. So what I'm going to do is I've got some what they call coupling nuts. You get them where they sell the threaded rod. I'll cut that about in half and put one on each end, and then machine it down round and to length, about the length of this. And I will put them on after final assembly with some thread lock. I'll do that off camera because it's simple enough. That's what it looks like. Now this one's already held on with thread lock. This one is not. I turned it on the lathe, and if you have trouble unscrewing the one in the end that's in question, just wrap a little emery cloth around it while it's still in the 3-jaw chuck, along with slip joint pliers, and it'll come off as such. And but put a little bit of thread lock on there. And it's good to go. And there you have it, good as new, if not better. Got a nice brand new screw in there. That's what the old one looks like, just to remind you, with a big bend in it. And the paint looks actually pretty good now that it's cleaned up. As good as this one, for that matter, virtually. The castings are pretty rough anyway. Well, thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes this video on rebuilding of the CRAFTSMAN Palmgren drill press vise. I hope you liked it. Be sure to watch many of my other videos, and this is tubalcain saying so long for now.